Hey everyone, my name is Justin. Welcome to the channel where my son and I take a look at games, classic and modern, and give our thoughts on how these games appeal to different generations. Today we're taking a look at Persona 3 Reload, a remake of the 2006 classic by Atlus, released in February of this year. And as a big fan of the original Persona games, and as someone who has Persona 5 as his favorite game on the PS4, Persona 3 Reload came with big shoes to fill and a rabid fan base. So it begs the question, does this live up to the hype? And how does it compare to Persona 5 and other games in the franchise?
The story begins with you as a transfer student who moves into the dorms, and immediately weird stuff starts happening. You are quickly introduced to the game's mechanics, specifically the Dark Hour, the monsters here which are referred to as the Shadows, and personas, the magical representation of a character's inner self. We get wrapped up in the C's, the Specialized Extracurricular Execution Squad. Our job is to hunt down and destroy the shadows that are feasting on people during the dark hour and leaving them with the apathy syndrome, which is a growing issue in town. The main targets are the 12 major shadows, each representing a different arcana, such as the Hanged Man, Death, Lovers, things like that. Persona 3 has a major theme of death, grief, and overcoming the loss of loved ones. How do people move on after that trauma? Do they run from it? Bury themselves in their work? Hide from it entirely? It's a dark topic, but one that is explored really well through all the main cast and all the various side characters.
I really enjoyed the story. I found the dark theme interesting and handled with the right amount of respect. But personally, while I understand it from a narrative perspective, I feel the game could have used some other influences to offer a break in the darkness. As a result, the story is a bit heavy-handed and dour for long stretches. Also, some of the side character social links to me were more random and didn't land as well as others. And while everyone deals with death and loss at some point in our lives, it just felt weird to me that literally everyone we are interacting with is dealing with some kind of recent loss. Others, like the random little girl at the temple, felt just off. Her story made sense, but it's just weird that as a grown adult, we're walking around talking to random little girls at playgrounds.
I get what you're saying, Dad, and I sort of agree. But I also kinda liked the social links. The hanged arcana with the little girl whose parents are getting divorced, to me, made sense as she was hanged between two choices. She's watching her parents' marriage die, and it's really sad. Overall, I liked the story and thought it was an interesting theme. And I really liked the Dark Hour. It looked cool, and the lore behind it was interesting.
The overall cast in Persona 3 is rather large. So instead of every character, we've decided to talk about our top and bottom two characters and social links in the game.
My favorite characters were Yukari and Koromaru. Yukari because she's super useful and never left our party. She was written very well. Her backstory with the loss of her dad and her mom trying to move on was sad, but handled really well. As a team member, she was the best healer in the game, and her wind magic was really useful. Koromaru, again, really useful with his dark magic. And it's also really interesting because it's like a dog, while everyone else is a person. It was a nice change. On the other hand, there's Sanjiro, who I just didn't feel like he was around long enough for me to really connect with him. And as a unit, I feel like he and Aegis filled the same role. With her around, I didn't feel like we really needed Shinji. I really didn't have any others I didn't like, but if I had to nitpick, I'd say Junpei. He got a little annoying personality-wise, and while fire magic's really cool, it was only useful in few areas.
Hey, I like Junpei, but I agree with you, his elemental coverage wasn't great. For me, my favorite would probably be Yukari as well. You nailed it on her combat usefulness, but her story is also just great. At first, she's kind of snobby and standoffish, but as the game goes on, you begin to understand her more as she opens up. Mitsuru is probably my number 2 pick. She starts off kind of posh and fancy girl, but as the game goes on, you begin to see the weight of expectations placed on her. On top of that, her versatility in combat makes her a useful party member that rarely ever left my team. Bottom 2, I'd agree with you on Sanjuro. He's strong, but I never really used him. My least liked character, though, has to be Ken. Little kid characters tend to be hit or miss with me in games, and Ken to me was a big miss. I get what his story is, and as a combat unit, he's great as a healer slash light damage dealer. But I don't know, I just didn't like him as a character. Also, Koromaru is awesome, and you can pet the puppers! What'd you think of the social links, bud?
Well, my least favorite social link has to be the Moon Arcana and the Tower Arcana. Moon Arcana I didn't like because it didn't make much sense to me. I guess I can see what they were going for with him trying to cope and deal with the loss of his brother and feeling a big disappointment with his family, but I just didn't care about him or his story. For the Tower Arcana, I didn't like it. It was a bit harder to unlock than the other social links. This one felt really random to me. It was just some drunk monk at the bar. You shouldn't even be at the bar. You're a teenager!
Okay, but what ones did you like?
I really liked the Hierophant one, the old couple at the bookstore. They gave you little treats. I liked the story. They were a cute little old couple. I also really liked the Chariot, the friend from the track team. I really liked his story, and he seemed like a cool guy that was just pushing himself too hard, trying to please everyone. My only nitpick is that it would have been really cool if I had opened some kind of mini game by training with him on the track. Like, let us actually do something on the track.
For me, my two favorites were the Justice and Sun Arcanas. The Justice Arcana I enjoyed because Chihiro is just adorable. I enjoyed watching her come out of her shell, gain confidence, and learn to stand up for herself. But my absolute favorite one has to be the Sun Link. The Dying Young Man was a beautifully well written side story. As someone who's had to deal with those thoughts of an impending end, it was so realistic. And the grace with which he faced his end was wonderful, and in my opinion, the most touching moment of the game. On the other hand, there's the Hanged and Tempest Arcanas, which I just couldn't get into. The Hanged Arcana just felt weird. As a high school student, to go to some random little girl at the park, her story was fine, I suppose, but as a whole, I just couldn't get into it. The Tempest Arcana, I just couldn't bring myself to care. Maybe it's the English dialogue with the Japanese honorifics and then having the kids show up talking in a French English accent. Maybe it's just I'm not interested in sewing. But regardless, I just didn't care about his story at all. As a whole, though, I have to say the overall cast is fantastic. Finding a least favorite was hard, as the writing is generally really well done, and the stories being told make a lot of sense in the context of those characters, even if they all don't land with us. From a gameplay perspective, Persona 3 Reload plays a lot like Persona 5, which is good for me as it felt familiar. It's a turn-based RPG with some slice-of-life elements outside of the dungeons. The combat is fast. You break an enemy's weakness, knocking them down, and if you break the entire enemy team, you can do a big all-out attack, which is pretty cool.
The main gameplay is you go into the game's main dungeon, Tartarus, kill some shadows, level up, and once you reach the barrier level, you head back to the real world. Here you go to school, hang out with friends, study, maybe even get a part-time job. After certain story points, the barrier level will open up, allowing you to go further up the tower where the cycle repeats.
So general gameplay description aside, what jumped out to you about the gameplay, son?
I think it was good. I do think it got a little boring with the loop of go to school, get a burger, go to school, get a ramen, go to school, get a burger, go to school, go to Tartarus, and repeat. I did enjoy the combat. The third G attacks were pretty interesting and pretty cool. The speed up feature for dialogue is really useful for a New Game Plus, as you've already seen these monologues and you can just speed through them.
Yeah, the gameplay loop can get a bit stale. Coming from Persona 5, I felt that had more to do in the evenings. I had a lot of nights where there just wasn't anything to do. Now, personally, I enjoy the slice of life parts of the game, but I can see how those things can be a bit slow. I really enjoy the persona collecting and fusing element. Trying to fine tune each persona and make sure you have elemental and defensive coverage was fun. Moving around town, exploring the different locations was great, but I do wish there was more variety to town. I kind of felt like for being in a large town, there was a surprisingly small amount of places to go and things to do. Personally, I also miss the palaces from Persona 5. Persona 5 had Mementos as its version of Tartarus, and while the tower was cool, I felt like having that be the only dungeon in the game left me wanting more to do. The individual palaces of Persona 5 added a bit of flair and character to the game, with each one tying into a different team member's story. I think a separate dungeon based on each of the major arcana boss fights each full moon would have gone a long way to just mixing things up a bit. The music was also really good. It was dark and ominous when it needed to be. The battle theme is snazzy and upbeat. I'd say it's not my favorite soundtrack, and it doesn't stand out quite like Persona 5's jazz tracks do, but it's still great. If I had to pick a negative, though, it's the voice acting. While good, for the most part, it gets obnoxious at times, especially when you're in Tartarus, where the party members just don't shut up. They feel the need to call out every chest, every stairwell, every shadow, and after a while, I just want to make a main character solo run so I could do it in peace.
I agree with you, Dad, on the music. I think it was cool and fitting for what it was supposed to be. The talking didn't bother me as much. Sometimes it could be helpful. It just depends on when it's coming. Graphically speaking, it's really cool. Again, I think it's good for what it's trying to be. I do wish there was a bit more variety in the enemies. It was a lot of the same monster with just different colors, and I'd think, oh, I know what this guy's weak against, only to find out I'm wrong.
Well, that sounds like a rookie gamer problem.
Shut it, Dad. Anyway, the design of Tartarus was really fitting for the disorienting nature of the Dark Hour. It was weird and twisted, ranging out from the haunted school hallways to bright dance floors like setups, to weird walls covered in giant eyes.
That's a fair assessment. I think the graphics were great. The school and town were detailed beautifully, and the persona designs were all varied and really cool.
As a whole, the game was good. I liked the social links. It's not something you see a lot in games, and I thought they were really interesting, even if there were a few I didn't care for. The story, graphics, and everything were good. Some of the difficulty spikes felt unfair, like a fight where it's immune to everything or reflected everything. It was just annoying.
Again, rookie problems.
Dad! Anyway, gripes aside, I thought the game was really fun. It was just a bit long for my taste. 75 hours is a lot of content, but it also had moments where it just really slowed down, and it was hard to stay focused and engaged. But that's just me. What do you think, Dad?
I think those are valid points. My biggest issue with the game is just the fact that there were many days where, due to no one being available for social links and social stats being maxed, there was basically nothing to do. The length didn't bother me. I felt there was enough content to justify it, for the most part. But I do agree, the game did seem to drag in some moments. Difficulty didn't bother me, but then again, I'm not a noob, so...
Dad, enough! Anyway, I'd like to say, all things considered, I'd give Persona 3 Reloaded a 7.5 out of 10. It was an amazing game. The boss fights were interesting but challenging. And the difficulty setting was great, and it gave some flexibility for players like me. And no, Dad, it's not because I'm a noob.
I mean, you said you needed easy mode, not me. I'd go higher. I'd go 9 out of 10. This was a fantastic game. When it was announced, I saw a lot of the fans losing their minds, and I didn't understand as I'd never played Persona 3. But the characters, writing, thematic approach were spot on. I have some quibbles with some boss fights feeling cheap. The lack of dungeons outside of Tartarus was disappointing, and the main character opening the game, walking around in Dark Hour, oblivious to the pools of blood and coffins everywhere, had me cracking up from the get-go. But all in all, a fantastic game, and one I think fans of JRPGs absolutely should play. The length is an issue, but it has the girth to back it up.
So those are our thoughts on Persona 3 Reload. Have you braved the Dark Hour, or are you still oblivious to what happened in the shadows? Comment below and let us know. And if you like our work, please support us with a like, comment, and subscribe. Thanks for stopping by!